It started on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the air in my house should have smelled of roast chicken and contentment. Instead, it smelled of resentment. My son-in-law, Trent, stood in my living room, his jaw tight and his face flushed with a deep, ugly red. He was shouting so loudly that even the small carriage clock on my mantel seemed to stop ticking. "You've lost your mind, Eleanor," he yelled. The spittle flew from his mouth. He said it in front of my daughter, Emily, who stood frozen by the window. He said it in front of my granddaughter, who was hiding her face in her mother's skirt. He said it loud enough for my neighbors, the Abernethys, to peek through their lace curtains. I didn't respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just watched him. But as the veins on his neck bulged, I noticed something that made my heart turn to ice. My daughter didn't defend me. She just stared at the floor, silent. That silence was the real betrayal. That night, I went up to the attic. I opened the old cedar chest, and from beneath my wedding dress, I took out the leather-bound journal my late husband once called the weapon of truth. By Monday morning, the poison had already spread. The whispers followed me faster than the flu. I went to the market for milk, and Mr. Henderson, the shopkeeper, gave me a look of such profound pity. "Poor Eleanor," I heard him murmur to the next customer. "Such a shame. She's really losing it." Trent had been busy. He had launched his whisper campaign. He told everyone I had forgotten to turn off the stove, which was a lie. He said I'd misplaced my keys for 3 days, another lie. He told my neighbors I had been found wandering outside at night, confused. All of it a fabrication. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was laying the groundwork. He was building a case to prove I was incompetent. He wanted to take my house, the home my husband and I built with our own hands. I smiled politely at the gossipers. I nodded softly, as if I were indeed the confused, frail old fool they believed me to be. That evening, I opened my journal. I uncapped my good fountain pen and wrote, "He wants to play with perception. Let's play." My daughter, Emily, stopped visiting. The weekly tea we had shared every Tuesday for 10 years became strained, monthly phone calls. They were always short. I could hear Trent's voice in the background, coaching her, telling her what to say. "Mom, please don't make things harder," she would plead, her voice thin and tired. "Trent is just worried about you. We're all worried." It hurt more than I would ever admit. The loss of my daughter felt sharper than the insults from her husband. But I understood fear. As a teacher, I had seen it in my students. Emily was trapped between her loyalty to me and her fear of his manipulation. So, I stopped calling her. I let the silence do the talking. I needed her to feel my absence. The next morning, I took a sheet of my best stationery and wrote a short letter. I didn't mail it. I drove to her house and left the handwritten note on her doorstep, right on the welcome mat. I knew she wouldn't be the first one to find it. I knew Trent would make sure to intercept it. I began my vanishing act. It wasn't a literal disappearance, but an intentional one. I skipped my regular Sunday church visits, which set the parish talking. I stopped attending my Wednesday knitting group, which worried my friends. I wanted Trent to get comfortable. I wanted him to be fully convinced that I was unraveling, that I was retreating into myself, lost and confused. It worked. He started coming by more often, always unannounced. He'd use his key, the one Emily gave him, and I would discover him in my kitchen. "Just checking on you, Eleanor," he'd say, his smile all fake concern. But his eyes never matched his smile. His eyes scanned my shelves like a vulture circling its prey, taking inventory of my valuables. I let him believe he was winning. When he finally went into my study and found the house deed in my unlocked desk drawer, he let out a little sigh of victory. He was so pleased with himself, he didn't notice the faint, pinprick camera light above the mantel. My late husband had been a man who believed in preparation. He had been overly cautious, and years ago, he had installed an old, wired security system. It was outdated, but it was still working, and it recorded to a hidden hard drive in the basement. I had activated the camera in my study. It caught Trent's every move. It recorded him rummaging through my desk, his sneer when he read the letter I had accidentally left out. It captured his phone calls, his voice low and bragging to some friend. "It won't be long now," he said, laughing. "She's completely gone. I'll be locking down the property soon." I sat in my kitchen, watching the footage live on my tablet, my heart calm and steady. My teacup didn't even rattle in its saucer. "You're recording your own downfall, Trent," I whispered to the screen. He was providing all the evidence I would ever need. That night, I spent 2 hours downloading the clips. I uploaded all the footage to a secure cloud drive under a contact I created just for this. I named it Local Reporter. I began to escalate my performance. I started leaving small, deliberate mistakes for him to find, crumbs for him to follow. I left a piece of toast in the toaster until it was a blackened square, filling the kitchen with the smell of smoke. He found it and shook his head, sighing. I left a stack of mail, including bills, unopened on the hall table for a week. He found it and clicked his tongue. "Tisk, Eleanor. You have to pay your bills." I took one of my favorite porcelain flower pots from the porch, cracked it with a hammer, and left it on the steps as if it had been dropped by a shaky hand. Each mistake was a deliberate choice. Each failure was a carefully set lure. Trent would sigh, shake his head, and I would hear him on the phone with Emily later. "Your poor mother," he'd say. "She's slipping faster than I thought." He didn't realize I was baiting him. I was getting him confident, making him sloppy, and encouraging him to be loud. That night, I did something I had never done. I accidentally left my back door unlocked. He came just after midnight. I knew he would. His greed had made him impatient. I was in my armchair in the living room, in the dark, the house still and silent. I wasn't asleep. I was waiting. My teacup trembled, just slightly in my hand. I heard the back door creak open. I heard his soft-soled shoes on my kitchen tile. He was trying to be quiet, but the old floorboards gave him away. He was heading for the study for the deed, for my checkbook. He tiptoed into the dark study, his silhouette framed by the moonlight from the window. He was a shadow in my house. Just as he reached for my desk lamp, I whispered from the shadows of the living room, "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours, Trent." The look on his face was worth every ounce of patience, every moment of fear. He froze. His face went pale, startled, and then twisted with guilt. He stammered, "Eleanor, you scared me. I thought I heard a noise." He fled the house, and I locked the door behind him. The next day, he told Emily with deep concern that I was seeing things again, that I had been talking to myself in the dark. Emily, now completely under his spell, insisted on a wellness check. She called our family doctor, a man I had known for 30 years. He came by the house, his bag in his hand, his expression sympathetic and patronizing. He thought he was here to humor a confused old woman. "Eleanor," he said gently, "Emily tells me you've been a bit forgetful lately." He asked me a few simple questions. "Who is the president? What is the date?" He asked about my mood, my sleep, my memory. I smiled. I answered each one, not just correctly, but with the sharp, precise wit of a woman who had graded essays on Shakespeare for 40 years. I quoted a little King Lear for him. "When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools." The doctor left an hour later, deeply impressed and slightly embarrassed. Emily looked utterly confused. Her narrative was crumbling. Trent, who had been standing in the doorway, looked deeply, wonderfully uneasy. That evening, I sent a lovely, handwritten thank you note to the doctor's office. Tucked inside the card was a small, black USB drive. The USB drive was a small, curated collection of my evidence. It contained just 3 clips: Trent bragging on the phone about locking down the property, the footage of him finding the deed in my desk, and the short, damning clip of him sneaking into my house after midnight. I knew the doctor. He was a man bound by community ethics, a man who took his duty to protect his patients seriously. He couldn't ignore what he saw. He sent the contents of the drive, as an anonymous tip, to a local journalist he trusted. Within days, the quiet murmurs in town began again. But this time, they were not about my failing mind. They were about Trent's suspicious behavior. The whispers had changed direction. People were looking at him differently. My plan was working. The following Tuesday, I received an email to the new, private account I had created. It was from the journalist. Her name was Nadia. The subject line was community concern. The message was short. Mrs. Whitfield, I received some disturbing information. Would you be willing to talk? I agreed. Nadia, the reporter, arrived the next day. She was a young woman, sharp and professional, with eyes that missed nothing. I offered her tea, which she accepted. She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, her digital recorder between us, and she just listened. I didn't cry. I didn't play the victim. I was a literature teacher, and I told my story as such. I presented it like a well-structured essay, with a clear thesis, supporting evidence, and a logical conclusion. I showed her my journal, the weapon of truth. I showed her the timestamped files on my cloud drive. I played the audio of him yelling at me, the event that started it all. By the end of my story, Nadia's professional expression had hardened into a quiet, cold rage. She was hooked. He's monstrous, she said. I simply placed my hand on hers. You don't need to shout, I said softly, echoing my husband's old advice. Just tell the truth, but tell it loudly. A week later, her article appeared on the front page of the local online journal. The headline was stark. The Gaslight Games, how a greedy man tried to steal his mother-in-law's home. The fallout was immediate and beautiful. The town turned cold toward Trent overnight. The article, which included stills from the security footage, was undeniable. Mr. Henderson from the market called to apologize to me. Trent's boss, who was on the town council, called him in for a chat first thing in the morning. He was suspended by noon. Emily, finally seeing the proof in black and white, stopped answering his calls. He was isolated, just as he had tried to isolate me. And what about me? I simply went to the market, as I always did. I smiled at the same shopkeeper, who once pitied me. How are you feeling today, Mrs. Whitfield? He asked, his face full of respect. I smiled and placed my milk on the counter. I'm feeling quite well today, thank you. My vindication was quiet, but it was complete. But Trent was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. He wasn't done. He filed a lawsuit against me and the newspaper, claiming defamation of character. The letter came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, delivered by a courier. It was full of legal jargon, words like cease and desist, libel, and significant damages. It was an official court summons. I read it slowly, my finger tracing the embossed letterhead of the law firm he had hired. Then, I went to the kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of tea. So that's how you want to play? I murmured to the empty room. He wanted to drag me into a courtroom. He thought he could intimidate me, that I would fold under the pressure of a public fight. He thought I was just a quiet old teacher. He didn't know that I had coached the high school debate team for 3 state championships. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, and that was his final mistake. I picked up my phone. I called a lawyer. But I didn't just call any lawyer. I called my late husband's protege, a woman he had mentored from her first day of law school, a woman I hadn't spoken to in a year. Mara Kent arrived the next morning. She was a storm in a sharp, tailored suit, all high energy and sharper mind. She hugged me first, then sat at my table and spread Trent's legal papers out. He thinks this is intimidation, she said, her red pen already flying. We'll make it instruction. I smiled. My husband had always said she was the brightest he'd ever seen. Together, we began to prepare. It wasn't a defense we were building. It was a counteroffensive, built entirely on truth. We had my journal. We had the high-definition video clips. We had the audio recordings. We had the neighbors who had seen his car there at midnight. Mara, however, wanted more. She wanted his financials. Men like this, she said, are never just greedy in one part of their life. She filed for discovery. And that's when we found it. She discovered a second bank account, one I knew nothing about. It was in my name, Eleanor Whitfield, but the address was a P.O. box. It had been opened by Trent. The fraud was clear. Trent had forged my signature on the bank application. He had been using it to funnel money from a joint family fund my husband had set up for Emily and my granddaughter. It wasn't a lot, not yet. He was siphoning small amounts, just a few $100s at a time, testing the waters. But it was enough. It was bank fraud. It proved his intent beyond any doubt. My hand trembled as I stared at the documents, at my name forged in his sloppy handwriting. This was a new level of betrayal. He thought I would notice, I said, my voice quiet. He thought I was too old, too stupid, too lost in my grief to check the books. I looked up at Mara. He's never seen me grade 150 papers at midnight, looking for a single misplaced comma. Mara smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. He will now. We won't even mention this to his lawyer. We'll let him notice it in court. Courtrooms are strange theaters. I had been in one only once before, when my husband was sworn in as a magistrate. This time, I was the one at the center. Trent came in confident, a smirk on his face. He was whispering to his lawyer, trying to look relaxed, like this was all a big misunderstanding. He was trying to perform. I walked in quietly, wearing a simple navy blue dress. My only jewelry was the pearl brooch my husband gave me, shining on my lapel like a small, steady light. When it was my time, I took the stand. My voice didn't waver once. Trent's lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter, lonely old woman. He tried to suggest I was confused. I simply answered his questions, clearly and precisely. No, sir, I said. I was not confused. I was documenting. Then it was Mara's turn. She stood up, holding a single small flash drive. Your Honor, she said, permission to present evidence from the plaintiff's pretrial discovery, Item 7. It is labeled home security footage. The judge agreed. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. The video, crisp and clear, filled the large screens. The courtroom watched, in dead silence, as Trent used his key to enter my house. They watched him search my desk. They watched him find the deed. Then Mara played the audio from his phone call, his bragging, arrogant voice filling the room. She's completely gone. I'll be locking down the property soon. A collective gasp went up from the gallery. Trent's lawyer's face went pale. Emily, who was sitting in the back row, covered her mouth, a small sob escaping. Trent himself looked like he had been struck. And me? I sat still, my fingers folded neatly in my lap, and I watched the truth play out for everyone to see. The judge's face was like stone. He called an immediate recess. The defamation case was dead, but Trent's career, his reputation, and his life were already collapsing around him before he even left the room. Outside the courthouse, during the recess, Trent cornered me by the elevators. His confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweaty panic. You set me up, he hissed, his eyes darting around. You planted all of it. I tilted my head, looking at him not with anger, but with something like curiosity, as if he were a badly written character in a novel. No, Trent, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the marble hall. You walked right into your own story. I just held the pen. He started to mutter something about forgiveness, about family, about how we could fix this. He even tried to touch my arm. I pulled away. I'm done, I said, cutting him off. I am done raising children who aren't mine. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, broken and exposed. That night, long after the judge had thrown out the case, I heard a soft knock on my front door. It was Emily. She was alone, and she was crying. She apologized between sobs, her words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and shame. I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't know the extent of it. He said, he made it sound like you were a danger to yourself. He made me believe I was helping you by letting him take control. I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak, let her pour out all the fear and manipulation of the last few months. When she was finished, I simply opened my arms and she fell into them, just as she did when she was a little girl. I know, I said gently, stroking her hair. People like him always do. They find the love you have for someone and they twist it into a weapon. We sat in the living room for a long time, the silence comfortable, the air finally clear. It smelled like healing and regret. But just as the peace began to settle, there was another knock at the door. It was sharper, more official. I opened it to find two police officers, their hats in their hands. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield?" the senior officer asked. I nodded. "We're here regarding Trent Becker. Based on evidence presented in civil court today, specifically related to bank fraud and attempted theft of property, the district attorney is pressing criminal charges."
He was being arrested.
The machine I had set in motion was finishing its work. The officers asked me for a formal statement, and I invited them in. I gave it to them clearly, calmly, like I was reading a lesson plan. I walked them through the journal, the files, and the timeline. "He underestimated memory," I said, as I handed them a copy of the bank fraud documents Mara had found. "Especially mine." They thanked me, and as the officers left, the younger one paused on the porch. He turned back to me, his expression full of respect. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you've done this whole town a favor. We've had suspicions about that man for a while. The article about the trial and the subsequent criminal charges went viral in our state. My quiet life was, for a moment, not so quiet. People from other towns, other cities, began to write me letters. Women shared their own stories of being gaslight, of being called confused or difficult. I became, as Nadia's paper put it, a quiet symbol of resilience. I didn't seek the attention. I found it rather exhausting. I just wanted my home back, my life back. But I understood that the truth, after being suppressed for so long, had a way of echoing louder than any of Trent's lies. I drank my tea. I tended my garden. I let the storm rage outside my walls, knowing it could no longer touch me. Then one afternoon I got a letter. It was handwritten on thin, floral stationery. The return address was from a town 3 hours away. It was from Trent's mother. I opened the letter with a sense of curiosity. The handwriting was trembling, a spidery script from an unsteady hand. It was a letter of profound shame. "Dear Mrs. Whitfield," it began. I read the news. "I am so sorry. I raised him better than this, or at least I thought I did." My eyes scanned the page, and then I saw the line that confirmed everything. He did the same thing to his own grandmother once. He tried to have her declared incompetent to get her house. I stopped him then. "I am so sorry he did it to you, and I am sorry you had to be the one to endure it and to stop him this time." I folded the letter gently and placed it inside my leather-bound journal. Some patterns, I thought, run too deep to ever be fixed. He was not a man who made a mistake. He was a man who had a method. That night, I made one final phone call. I called Nadia, the reporter. I had one last story for her. The second article was not about Trent. It was titled "The Quiet Strength of Eleanor Whitfield." Nadia used the letter from Trent's mother, with her permission, to show the pattern of abuse. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about how intelligence and patience are weapons, and how being called crazy is the oldest trick in the book used to silence women. After that article, people stopped whispering about my age, my memory, or my mind. They started whispering about my courage instead. The pity was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding respect. Mr. Henderson at the market gave me my milk for free, saying I was an inspiration. I was grateful, but I was also ready for the story to be over. But I wasn't finished. Not quite. I had one last piece of business to attend to. When Trent was convicted, his assets were seized to pay his legal debts and restitution for the fraud. His prized possession, a flashy red sports car he adored, was listed for public auction. I had Mara attend the auction for me. I gave her a simple instruction. She bought the car anonymously, using a shell company she had set up. The next day, I signed the title over. I drove the car, my first and last time in such a ridiculous vehicle, to the local women's shelter, the one that helped women and children escaping abusive homes. I donated it to them, in Emily's name, to be used by their outreach workers or sold to fund their programs. When Emily found out what I had done, she came to my house. She didn't say anything. She just sat on my porch and sobbed, but this time, it was from gratitude. It was a cleansing rain. That spring, I began to restore my late husband's garden. After months of neglect and emotional turmoil, it was overgrown with weeds. I spent my mornings on my knees, pulling up the intruders, my hands in the rich soil. I replanted his favorites: lavender, tall white daisies, and the small, climbing white roses he loved. He always said truth needs tending, just like a garden. I whispered to the empty air, though it didn't feel empty. The sun felt different that morning. It was gentler, warmer. The fight was over. The peace was real. I was just Eleanor Whitfield, a retired teacher in her garden. As I was washing the soil from my hands, the mail carrier arrived. Among the bills and catalogs was a small, plain envelope. It had no return address, just my name and address written in a messy, unfamiliar hand. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, torn from a notebook. On it was a single line, written in that same messy handwriting. I was wrong about you. There was no name, but I knew who it was from. Trent from prison. He had finally understood. I smiled, a faint, tired smile. I folded the note and tucked it into the last page of my leather-bound journal. Then I closed the journal for the last time and placed it back in the cedar chest in the attic. Justice wasn't loud, like he had been. It wasn't angry. It was precise. It was patient. And sometimes, it just looked like a silver-haired woman tending her roses, while the world outside finally learned to hush and listen. I went back to my garden, snipped a perfect white rose, and looked up at the blue sky. I whispered, "Your garden's safe now, love."